Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today in the 21st edition of the CVC Insider Series. Today we have a wonderful session prepared featuring Dr. Xin Ma, who's the Managing Director of the Total Carbon Neutrality Ventures, and having previously worked over the last decade at Total's strategy, finance, and M&A divisions. But before we get started, I wanted to quickly set the stage so you all have some context. First of all, my name is Alba. I'm part of the 500 Startups team. 500, we are one of the world's most active seed stage investors with over 2,500 direct investments into startups from almost 80 countries. And within 500, I'm the head of global innovation strategy, where I work closely with corporate investors and innovators to power their own projects, partnerships, and investments into startups. And we started the CVC Insider Series event as a part of our efforts to help raise the bar around corporate venturing and building a more stronger and supportive ecosystem for startups, corporates, and investors alike. And every 2 weeks, we invite to this roundtable a top corporate venturing practitioner and share their unique journey into CVC, the specific challenges that they faced, best practices that they've learned along the way. So if you have any speaker that you'd like to nominate to the series, please feel free to let us know. And our host, Nicolas Sauvage, will be moderating today's discussion, but there's also a Q&A function, so feel free to ask any questions that may come up, and we'll try our best to cover them. So now that you know what's going on, I'm going to hand it over to Nicolas. Please take it away.
Thank you, Alba, and thank you, 500 Startups. It's impressive to know that you're already at 2,500 startups. This is really impressive. So today, it's really nice to have Xin Ma to join us. She was ranked number 4 of rising stars worldwide by the GCV. So clearly, we're going to learn a lot today. So Xin, if you could take 5 to 10 minutes to introduce yourself, your personal journey into corporate venturing, and maybe what you do at Total Carbon Neutrality Ventures.
Thank you so much, Nicola, and thank you, Alba. It's such a pleasure to be here and to have this opportunity probably to exchange and share with fellow investors and startup and the bigger community. Yeah. So Nicola asked me these very philosophical questions about, who you are and what you do. And I try to compile a couple of pages and trying to answer these questions. So I think probably start with the education background. I actually started. I'm raised and born in China, and I'm born actually in a kind of coal province, important energy for China and India, countries like this. And then I left my province to go to Beijing to study in University Science and Technology in Beijing, and I quickly moved to the energy sector by doing my master degree in University of Petroleum. And from there, that's really like entered in a world that I'm really passionate about. That's the energy world. So from University of Petroleum, I started to work for one of the top national oil companies in China. It's called CNPC and PetroChina. And from there, I was just curious about the international elements of this energy sector. So that brought me to Scotland with my doctoral degree in energy economics. And also I worked with Deloitte out of my PhD degree. And that's where, energy really become very important. And if we can remember, by the end of my study and in the beginning when I worked for Deloitte, the oil price was kind of like $100 per barrel, and the big banks were still forecasting this going even higher to $250 per barrel. So that's where I decided to join an international energy company. It was called Oil Major at that time, Total, and that brought me to Paris. So that's my first job, is really to analyzing a bit like a small IEA within the group to study about the energy mix, where the energy sector is going, the price, the supply, the demand, the geopolitical sectors, and all this. That was really, really interesting and fun, my first job. And from there, I started to enter into the business and operational parts of the company and started to work on the M&A and finance elements of the company. That's really where the energy sector started to really, really also taking a lot of new kind of initiative, taking turns when solar become important, distributed energy become very important, energy storage become important. And Total has brought a company called Soft in 2016 in the battery sector. And also that's a year when the Paris Agreement was kind of finally legalized at that year. So that is where all these fascinating things happening. We see new companies like Tesla. In China, there was a company called NIO. So it was just all fascinating about this. That was also like I had a maternity leave, and I was thinking of changing my career. And I thought about all this and looking at all these new trends. And I started to observe there's a division in Total that they are doing all sorts of investment at that stage. They do the hydrogen investment, distributed wind and IoT and all that. So I was really interested. I got in touch with the director at that time, and he was really confirmed. He said, you have this dual kind of transaction background, and you're interested in energy. Trust me, you will not get bored. You'll be like in a kind of like a business school, and the difference is you are going to make the cases and executing the cases. You're really having fun. So that was like Mr. François Badois at that time. And that's where I joined the team, and he was right. I really not bored about my job. So when I joined the venture team, we were still called Total Energy Venture at that time. And the investment thesis was really probably the bio kind of investment wave, and the first kind of generation clean tech investment was already a bit fading off. And that's a time when people explore a lot about renewable energy, energy efficiency, and distributed energy, and all these IoT tools and big data modeling for the energy system. So that was kind of like investment theme when I joined the team. And very quickly, when I joined the team, the mobility became a very important theme as well, especially electric mobility when in China and in US, and we see that Norway has really fantastically adopting the electric vehicles very well. So from that year, we have done a lot of mobility related investment. And also I had some thinking my first year within the venture group, because at that time, the venture team, like 75% of our portfolio are from the US and Europe. So it's like, it's interesting because Asian is just so important for renewable energy, for battery, for electric mobility, and for climate. It must be very interesting and very important for us to be present. And also it's very innovative in Asia. So that's where with our director, Mr. Girish Natkani, we kind of discussed, and we agreed that it would be really make good sense for me to be more focusing on the investment in Asia. So that's where I think that's by the end of 2017, beginning of 2018. So I started a bit like a startup journey within the venture team, basically creating the Asian platform. So we started to really explore around. I started by investing a couple of funds, and we were very, very lucky to identify very good partners in the GP system. So that's where we quickly invested in New Capital. So they are a very good investor in the mobility sector. And also we started to anchor a fund in China with Cathay Capital to cover all the energy and clean tech field. So that's from there, it's really, I think the Asian investment just started to really taking off. So we've kind of settled down the platform in China. We've sent one of our teams to be allocated in the fund. And also we started working on India, where the group Total also started to building some strategic partnership with a local large corporates called Adani. And that is really kind of give us a lot of kind of inspiration to also start to cover India, and especially plastic and also the electric mobility is such an important field. So that's where we started to mapping and covering and investing in India. And also naturally, we just also cover Southeast Asia with Singapore as a hub, with lots of very interesting energy efficiency, the battery, the different interesting deals. So I mean, we're still rather young startup within the venture team. We are kind of 4 years old, but I think we're really growing well. And as my conversation in the beginning of my career, I really don't feel bored. So probably quickly, Nicolas also gave me this homework to share what do we do. So maybe quickly to share the carbon neutrality ventures. We are corporate venture of the Total and Total Group. So we're the international energy group. We are an evergreen fund of $100 million with 16 people, a small team investing globally. And until now, we have 60 investment in different startups. And also we have around investment in 12 funds. In terms of investment stage, we have kind of barbell strategy. Either we invest at a relatively earlier stage so that we can accompany startup with the whole journey. So that's pre-A, A round or B round. Or for some very strategic deals, we can go a bit later stage. So we do pre-IPO kind of deals and with mitigated risk and a very quick kind of exit roadmap. Our investment criteria is really the triple criteria. We kind of have to have a very clear and big carbon and greenhouse gas impact. And also it has to make financial sense, have a good financial return. And finally, has to be relevant or relatively relevant for the group. In terms of ticket size, we have like 1 to 5 million to the minority investment. We could go a bit to 10 million or more, depending on the situation. And normally we take observer seat. So I think Nicolas also asked to cover the value added to startups. So that's somewhere actually we thought a lot in the last years, and we have a dedicated manager, senior manager, who's really there serving the role of bridging the startup with the corporates, because we know sometimes corporates can be a big maze for startup, even for us within the group. And also we really, we can work with startup in terms of joint development, joint research agreement. We can help with industry deployment with our test and also give them proof of concept in our sites. And we can also be their customers. That's the case for some of the kind of a P2P car sharing and this kind of startups. We are really one of their first customers. And also we can helping them to scale globally when it is needed. I probably won't get into a lot of details about our, like what sectors we are covering, probably just very high level. We're energy company, and I think the most important challenge and opportunities that we're facing is a climate challenge, and it's a need to get to net zero by 2050, and also at the same time to meet the needs of evergreen population with people have a very natural needs for a better, healthier, and more productive life. So that's kind of explain our very wide range of investment. So we invest in all the sectors that has a big carbon impact in for the manufacturing sector, electricity sector, the land use, like agriculture and cattle and land use forest sector, and also the mobility sector, and also the building sector. So on the bottom, I list all the sectors that we are covering: the clean tech, the renewable energy, energy storage, battery hydrogen, alternate protein, battery swap, EV charging, electric mobility. So all this is a very wide range. I'm happy to probably explain and share more later.
Maybe a quick question. What is the meaning of the percentage on your slide?
Yeah, I think this is actually a quote from the book by Bill Gates.
Okay.
That's basically the percentage of the greenhouse gas generated in each sector. Yep. So actually, when we talk about the challenges, we need to break them down and to see where exactly concretely the challenge come from. and what are the technology and business models we can work on to addressing those challenges. So that's really like how we see us as playing a role in looking for these technologies and business models in helping us to addressing the climate change, while at the same time to have a better, more energy, affordable and clean in the future. So quickly, this is our portfolios. You can see the different sectors we are covering, and they are all global. And this is the different funds that we are covering. And you can also see that we have clean tech, mobility, smart energy, agri, and bio, smart city, digital. So that's very exciting and very wide, and they are really very valuable and good source of deal flow for us. Maybe just to finish, because Nicolas' list of philosophical questions also included like, what's your challenge? What's your aspiration? I think, for the challenge, we think we are really working in a very interesting, exciting kind of a sector. But at the same time, it's rather challenging. Just part of the profession is you are really constantly need to work on like a very delicate act of balance. You have to have a very open eye to all the micro elements that could boil down, impact the companies that we are investing, and also have a good master of the micro elements to make sure that we don't miss things. These are very early stage companies. And also as a corporate venture, we really have to well balance internal and external, make sure that the external world have a good knowledge of us and they love to work with us. And also the internal teams, they know us as well. They are our stakeholder and our ambassador and our users. And also we need to allocate our time between different deal sourcing and deal execution, and also to put them in a longer time range to make sure there's a proper portfolio management. But I think that's really, I'm sure all my fellow investors will have to facing the same challenge. Probably for us as a corporate venture, sometimes it's a bit more challenging in terms of finding the right team member, because you really need people who's passionate about investment, have a good knowledge of deal and finance, but at the same time has to know the group in order to really find a good solution and find a good stakeholder and sponsor within the group. And having said that, I think there's still a lot of things to be done. Asia as a continent with more than 60% population of the world and more than 50% of the CO2 and greenhouse gas. And with all this amazing kind of innovation is coming on. And I think there's a lot of things we as a corporate venture can do. So really my aspiration is to continue our road journey to invest in Asia, and hopefully from our activities to do our parts in managing and fighting the climate change challenge while addressing a better energy system in the future. So I'm really, really happy to be here today and really, really happy to be connected with the community. So I'm open for any contact for either exchange on deals, or if your portfolio company would like to have their solution tested in our group, or maybe scale up globally in where we present, or entrepreneurs want to talk about your ideas, or just have a casual, open-minded chat. Yeah, Nicolas, so
very nice. Thank you, Xin. That was a very long 5 minutes introduction, but I think you answered many questions that I would have asked anyway. I really like what you say about you're like a startup. Actually, I feel like TDK Ventures is a startup, so it totally resonates with me. I also like your comment about or your last boss saying join because you will never be bored. And I think that's one of the things that maybe we can really convey to the audience for those who are not yet in corporate venturing. It's never boring. Every morning you wake up and you're going to learn something new. And that leads me to the first thing that you wrote in your first slide, which is the word curiosity. And I think that's one of this most important trait of corporate venturing is you need to be curious. You want to learn. You want to see what the future could be. So tell me more about why you think curiosity is important to the point you wrote it in your first slide, and why do you think it's good for an investor to be curious?
Yeah, I think that's really extremely important because, and also I think that's also where brought me into this career is a curiosity. Because, for example, we were talking about, here we were talking about some climate challenge, we're talking about energy transition. Those are extremely big and massive economic and geopolitical systems. And it's very difficult because a lot of solutions doesn't exist yet. And also we are talking about things down in the 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, maybe 100 years on the line. If we are really thinking just within the year about what we already know and control the risk in a way that we are used to in the big corporates, I don't think that we are going to build the system that we're going to need for us to really go to the climate and a better energy solution. And also, I think the curiosity really helps in this sector, because if we're just very single-minded to say, I want to look for this startup, we're just going to miss so much like good solutions, good ideas, good startups on the way. So I really think that's just a healthy driver to bring us in the career. And even if you don't have a previous experience, simply having curiosity, coming in our career. And sometimes we need to get out our textbook in high school, or we need to talk to people, different people, to have ideas. So I really, really think that's important for us.
Very nice. So one of the things I want to cover today is really your focus in Asia, which is really a stronger focus than anyone else we have interviewed so far. But before that, and maybe it will touch on Asia, but your approach was quite interesting. You started by investing in funds rather than just going direct investment only. And I want to understand, what was the driving decisions for you to start with investing in funds? And did it bring you what you expected, maybe more, maybe less? What was your learnings from investing in funds as your strategy to get into a new geography?
Yeah, and that's really the question that we were pondering when we started the little venture we had in Asia. So we didn't have a venture team in Asia. And so we were like, would this be better if we just have a team, physical team, because it's very important to have a local knowledge, to have a really physical exchange? Or should we have a fund to start with? So we decided to go for the funds because we think, in terms of time frame, because things move very quickly. For us to really have a coverage on the ground, it's so important to be allied with some professionals already on the ground, in the ecosystem, in the landscape already. And I think what we did, we are pretty happy with what we have done, is to looking for those like Neo Capital and Kate Capital, those partners, because they have a big landscape. They not only see the sector we are investing, they also have a wider range of other view on other sectors adjacent to what we are doing. And also, with investing them, we really have a really good feedback from them about the sector mapping. So not only they bring deals, they also do a deep dive with us on the sector and all that. That's really very helpful for us, to allow us time to also figure out our strategy, to test the water, to know where we want to put our resource. Yeah, so I think that we were quite happy with that approach. And we think that's a good approach when we go to a country or a new sector that we're not familiar with, to just kickstart quickly. It's a good approach to work with professionals in that field.
Very nice. And because you've invested in, 11, I think, and then you did your own Anchor. So because you've invested in so many, you also can see the difference between them. And so can you tell us, without maybe naming names, but which ones was really bringing more value because of different best practices versus the one where actually, if you were to do it again, you wouldn't choose them? So I'm not asking to name names, but is there things that the audience could identify to know which funds actually will work out better?
Mm-hmm. Maybe start with, our thinking is we already have a group of professionals within the team. And we have been investing since 2008. So if a sector we already know, it's within our scope of expertise, we prefer to do it directly. Mm-hmm. Only refer to a fund when one is a new geography, and two, it's a new sector, or three, it's something you need a lot of resource, a lot of industry kind of collaboration in order to make this sector working, for example, hydrogen. So that's where we prefer to be in the funds, with some kind of our capital and also leverage our partners' capital together to push the sector to be matured, to build a kind of value chain and ecosystem. So each time, I think it's extremely important for us to really be clear what we want from the fund. Is that helping us to just putting our feet on the ground, to have some people who provide with local insights? So that could be the case in China, in India, or it can be something, it's a new sector. For example, recently we started to really go a bit beyond the border, looking at agri-tech things because they have such a big CO2 kind of impact. So that's where we bring in the agriculture-related funds, because that's not traditionally our expertise. And also, thirdly, the CCUS and the hydrogen, those are the things you really cannot do it alone, or you put a lot of resources, maybe that won't help the sector to be mature. So with CCUS, we have OGCICA, that's Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. And with hydrogen, we are in the process of setting up some funds. So I think it's really that I think all these funds we have selected are the really great professionals. What is really important is us to be clear what we want. Sometimes probably we were thinking we're going to be that in geography and we invested, but at the end we didn't have the resource to follow up in that geography. So maybe it didn't turn out to be satisfactory, but it's really because probably in the beginning we were not doing this clearly. So that's really make us very, very prudent and cautious to refine many, many times before we enter into the funds.
I can hear a few golden nuggets, but I think being clear on the why you want to do it, I think is very good. And I like the fact that you had different strategy for different funds. Some was for geographic, some was to go into a place you're not familiar with. And I think agriculture is really interesting because, like you show in your slide, 19% of gas emissions is from agriculture. So this is a big move the needle kind of area. So I really like the fact that you're very clear, but there is another golden nugget you just mentioned, and I want you to double click, which is sometimes you invested in a fund and you didn't have the team to really follow through. And so many people think that fund is maybe a way of augmenting your reach, which is true, but without increasing your own team, internal team. But actually, you kind of need to prepare for that growth. So can you explain how you, especially when you have 12 funds, how do you grow the team that follows through with these funds?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good question. Actually, I just realized it probably is time consuming in following the funds because they have so much deal flow. They just have a bigger size. We have a small tickets, we can leverage that bigger size to see so much deal flow. And sometimes they come across even more that they are not investing, but it's interesting for you. They set up database for you. So you can basically go into the database directly, looking for things they have seen. So it's true that they take time. I think it's very important actually, even if our focus is direct investment, it's so important to understand the GP-LP relationship and what we can leverage out of funds, because that can be very valuable. There's a leverage factor. And the second thing is sometimes you also need to leverage resource, because very often, I mean, the corporate venture, you don't have a like 50 people team. You normally 10, 20, probably a bit more. But we are not a very huge team. So that's where you kind of need to leverage also a virtual kind of ecosystem within the group. Normally there are people, for example, in the innovation team, in the business development team, in the strategy team, or in the business unit that is really directly in contact with the clients and see the challenging coming. So actually for one of the funds, if I like remanage it again, I will probably leverage more about our internal team, because a lot of the startup that they invest, probably as a venture, I might not be interested in investing, but those things can just share such a great insights, and also some of their solutions can be used by our internal team. So in the beginning, we were kind of like, okay, we invest in the fund, we follow it up. We didn't thinking of open it up. And then we realized it's just so valuable. We're just inviting people, if they're interested in coming to the quarterly meeting, the monthly meeting, we invite them. And then they will realize, certain opportunities are so important. I think that's probably a learning experience I had in the past years.
Very nice. Okay, this is really good to share. You also mentioned some of these funds give deep dives. Any best practice on how to leverage their deep dive so that it really helps you and your team?
Yeah, I think probably most important thing is to know really, really well what are the specialty of the funds, know the investment personnel, who are the best person to go to, who cover these fields. And also to know, to find the overlap between the funds and us. Not only this will be important for the internal stakeholders, and also the funds is capable, because we don't want to be an LP that we invest in a certain amount and we ask the fund just to do the fresh study for us, do the fresh mapping for us, do the fresh. So nice way is they already specialty in this team. They probably have done something within their funds, and we just need to communicate and also identify clearly what are the subsectors that we are interested and what are the startups that we're interested. So without adding a lot of efforts, they know when they have some kind of sector mapping deep dive within the funds, they can think of us, they can probably inviting us. We think that's actually a good approach. We've done a lot of things with some of our funds on the solid state battery, on the hydrogen, on battery swap. And that's very valuable. And we have a lot of internal colleagues interested in this. So I think really it's the finding the common interest. There's colleagues coming in as well. That's actually helping the fund, because the funds realize there's a real interest. And they could also probably helping their portfolio by bringing some potential kind of sponsors within the group. And then we don't add extra a lot of time for the funds.
Very nice. And I think it also comes back from you being very clear about the why you want to invest in certain funds, so you can be very explicit about why you are interested. Maybe just a tactical question, but I think it matters. Is there a percentage ownership in terms of LP into the fund? You feel like you should not go too low because then you're not important, but not too high. Mm-hmm. So do you have like this kind of percentage that you think is the right balance as an LP?
Yeah, I think majority of our funds, we are relatively low. We're just one of the LP. We are not anchor of LP, but we like to select the fund carefully so that for some reason we can also add in value. For example, if they are top funds in France and Total is very present in France and in the top European countries. So that's a value to add for the funds as well, because they're a portfolio company with some solution, they can quickly test with us and proof of concept with us. So in that case, even it's a small ticket, but there are some sense for the both sides to work closely with each other. And then the only case exception is a fund in China, the Cathay Energy Fund. We actually anchored, we actually have a former team of us within the fund. That's where we really think it's valuable, because we can really work closely with the fund to kind of like started to say, those are the sectors maybe currently very important, plastic recycling, battery recycling. We can adjust that. We can have a closer relationship with. That's very valuable as well.
Very nice. So it's interesting because we talk a lot about corporate VCs. You should add more value than just capital to your startups. But what you're saying is that best practice translates very well into, as an LP, you should bring more value than just the capital you bring. So that's again, a really nice golden nugget. I want to move to the anchor fund, and then we will move to the Asia topic. So for anchor fund, first, how do you define it? Does it mean that you're the biggest LP in a fund? And why did you decide to be an anchor for that fund?
Yeah, so anchor fund, you are like a bigger LP, but you remain LP because you probably doesn't want to be a GP, because GP legally kind of you are on the driving seats, you make decisions, and you have a higher liability. So we prefer to be LP in most of the cases. And then being the anchor means you have a higher share of investment, and then you have a higher kind of influence, probably in the sense like advisory committee, strategic committee, in kind of orienting where the strategic focus can be, but not decision making. We are not in the investment committee, but we're in the strategic committee, advisory committee with governance and things. We have a bigger role. Probably we can also, I think that's a practice in France as well. Very often you, as an anchor investor, you can have your investor, we call it investor in residence. So you basically have one of your team work a couple of years in the fund to be trained, to be really witnessing everything. And then, so all this you will only get when you are anchor, not just a small LP. So that can be valuable as well.
Very nice. I want to double click on this investor in residence. Is it a full-time rotation, like they spend 2 years full-time and then they come back, or is it part-time? How does it work?
It's really case by case and negotiable. What I've seen is you can really assign your team member full-time a couple of years, full-time, really function like one of the person in the fund. That can be really, really valuable because once they are in the system, they see the carry, they see the investment period, the exit period, the pressure to manage as a portfolio, how to manage the exit. That's extremely, extremely valuable to bring back to the corporate venture. But of course, that need to be also carefully managed because we don't want that team member can kind of stay. So that's where, it's really important to make sure also the curiosity remains and there's interesting deals within the corporates also as well, and adding great value to the corporates.
And the mission balance of the corporate, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, this is really interesting. It's like a very intense training. How many of these investors in residence have you placed and now they are back into your corporate VC?
We had one already came back, and now I have our colleagues in Cathay as well. I know a couple of our French fellow corporates, large corporates, energy companies. They also have their personnel allocated in the fund. So I think works pretty well.
So I should probably interview you in 2 years, and we can see how much impact it is bringing back to you.
Yeah, we'll follow up.
I really want to talk about Asia because you're clearly the one investing in Asia, and you have clearly different ways, like different funds, anchor funds, and direct investments across a wide range of technology and space. First, can you tell us what you think is different about Asia versus what we have been talking a lot in this series about Europe and US?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really a very core question. I thought a lot in the beginning, and also had a lot of conversation with my colleagues. A lot of my well-intentioned colleagues or friends, they kind of, by the time, I think that's changing now, but by the time we're setting up our Asian division, they were like, okay, but there's just so much Me Too companies over there. It just copycat, and probably it works better in investing top technology in the US and Europe and doing the kind of the scale up and deployment in Asia. Why do you want to go there directly? But I think, the market is just massive, because if we talk about energy and climate, that's where the massive part of the CO2 is created. And also our part of the world, from the regulator, from the individual public and all that, has a big consciousness of the environment. And also because we are in the stage of development of our economy, we're not going to still rise a lot in terms of CO2 and all that. But the Asian countries like India, like China, and they have legitimate way to really develop themselves with available resources, which is less expensive, because their contribution in the share of CO2 in the air is just much smaller. So the problem is bigger, the market is bigger, And also you also see entrepreneurs, good entrepreneurs, and some are local entrepreneurs, very grounded. It's very good for the type of sectors we are looking at, like battery swap and all that. And some are we call the return turtles in Chinese, 海归, basically are referring to the people who done the study overseas and worked overseas, and they go back to China and working on the bigger market. So we see also smart entrepreneur like this. And most importantly, I think what is important is the clients and the public, they are just so curious and they are ready to test new solutions, and they are less risk conscious, not less risk aversion. So, and also the stage of development means this time the digital solution in Asia can be taken in a very nice way in the form of leapfrog. That can be the payment system, that can be the e-commerce, that can be the mobility, without everybody own a car, just a leapfrog to the shared mobility and electric mobility. So all this just make the ecosystem much, I think, very fascinating and exciting. And also it's such a big scope. And there is real, genuine innovation, because I could get argumentative with my colleagues, but healthy argumentative when they say there's no technology. But like, for example, the autonomous driving, the AI, and the battery technology, electric vehicles, all this, we can find really good players in Asia. That's a technology base. And also, I think you live in Asia as well. Just very nice the way entrepreneurs set up a platform, an ecosystem of like WeChat, like many things in the platform, like a Grab, a super app. Instead of in Europe, we tend to have like a vertical, very specialized solution. I think that's also very nice and different and exciting for us.
It's a very different way of thinking. I like when you mentioned the Taigui. For those who don't know, if one of the most difficult traditional character in Chinese is probably the turtle, Ugui the Gui.
Yes.
But I think it's not just the returning turtles. You have a lot of good entrepreneurs who are actually local and are really fast. And when you talk about super app, ecosystem, platforms, you go to Shenzhen and you have everything you need to create a hardware startup. There is no need to go beyond 50 kilometers. How would you differentiate China and India? Because both are extremely important for all the things you invest in. But how are they different, and with a filter as an investor?
I think probably the development stage is slightly different. China probably a bit ahead in many issues, but Indian is really very attractive in its own way. And there could be same issues, but different. For example, battery swap for scooters. A bit like Gogoro, but in China there are startups who are targeting at the delivery riders. We are in this kind of delivery economy. Those personnel, they have their two-wheeler, they ride 80 kilometers per day, and it's just such a hassle for them to have to stop and charging. And
they need to swap quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So that's and they are the lowest income like a community, and you really need for them to have a better kind of a utilization rate for their vehicles. So there are a couple of really good startups in this field, and we see them that one of them is really created by this Haigui style of Haigui. Somebody come from California, and the other one is created by some people really local, very grounded, know very well OEM. So we kind of see that, and we were saying, okay, that's very interesting. That can be also interesting in India. Because India, the issue is not about like two-wheelers, although the two-wheelers are coming, but probably in 2-5 years' time for electric vehicles. The electrification for mobility really happening for the 2-3-wheelers, but the dynamic can be so different because in China, people probably take a mobike and all that for the last mile. But in India, actually, the 3-wheeler play an important role for the last mile from metro to home and from the office to metro. So we see kind of like it's quite similar, share a lot of things, but the details can be very different. The economics can be very different. And also India, I think one amazing thing about India, because in China these days, people really, there's a lot of capital. around, from government to private sector, are very supportive of innovation, lots of capital available in China. We easily to see a company become very expensive very quickly. Well, for India, I think it's just amazing to see how the entrepreneurs can go with a small amount of capital and make the company already profitable. That's something I really very impressed and I appreciate a lot in India as well.
Yeah, I think India is amazing in terms of what they call Jugaad, which is this innovation with very limited means. And I think it's part of the mindset and that unlocks creativity. And you're right, in China, capital is not lacking. Now, we talked about China and India, but you're looking after all of Asia. So tell me more about which countries do you expect really good innovations in the energy space?
I think China, India are certainly the top ones because they certainly have those big ambition about renewable energy, like a huge amount of gigawatt of capacity will be added. And they will also adding on energy solutions, battery and all that. And also it's very important electric mobility in China and India, just massive. And hydrogen, I think both countries are now focusing a lot on hydrogen as well. Hydrogen for heavy duty vehicles and hydrogen for the rest of the economic system, and biofuel probably is important. So all this, I think China, India is undoubtedly the most important for energy and climate, but it's also important to see countries like Singapore, because they cover, those are like Singapore, Southeast Asia and Singapore, because Singapore is basically a hub for the good Southeast Asian startup to come. Those are, for example, Indonesia, Philippines, there are a lot of like off-grid kind of needs for the energy. There are, for example, Indonesia has so many islands. How do you make a clean and efficient energy system? And off-grid and digital IoT solutions can become very important. All these resorts, all this kind of business, CNI business in those regions, those can be a big thing to follow. And then Australia is just such a giant in terms of renewable energy. In terms of energy storage, and also the potential of agriculture sector in terms of carbon kind of natural-based solution to lock the carbons. And also it's also likely they have a lot of cheap renewable energy that can be making to hydrogen, and those can be then sell to the rest of the regions. So Australia can be interesting and important country to watch as well. Especially they already have some CO2 system. And then in the rest of the countries, we're also interested in following what's happening in Japan and Korea, although it's very more like an opportunist way, because there are just fantastic companies in the material science and battery technology there. It's just so nice to see what they are doing.
Very nice. Okay, very nice. Let me move, well, actually, let me double click on the hydrogen and biofuels. Why do you think it's now and it was not 10 years ago? And why is it now the right time to invest versus wait 10 more years?
I think when we look at energy, we always need to look at what are the big chunk of the base load will come from. So natural gas is already a very mature, lower and cleaner source to replacing the coal before the nuclear is accepted by the public opinion. But then hydrogen is not yet like natural gas now, but hydrogen could be the next one because the technology and the potential it can really bring out. And as said earlier on, this is a sector where we still need innovation because we can definitely produce green hydrogen, which is probably can be cheaper when in the place where abundant, redundant, curtailed renewable energy. But then there's the issue of store them and transport them because you cannot put them on the grid. So when now we think there's, it seems to be rather promising to have a new technology on producing them cheaply in a green way, and also to find out the new technology to store them and transport them. And especially we see that ecosystem starting to getting mature about the use of hydrogen for the mobility sector, because we know that for the four-wheeler, like passenger light duty cars, electrification is the way. We see the battery become cheaper and cheaper, longer mileage. But for the heavy duty vehicles, it doesn't work, that the batteries were just too big, take too long to charge and too expensive. And hydrogen are the way to really making this sector green. And now we need the system, the hydrogen fueling system and all that. So we see that now the government is pushing, this is the Germany, French government, a lot of other European governments are pushing for hydrogen. They are putting money for the infrastructure, and private sector, as Air Liquide, lots of private sector companies are also working on this in China as well. In the Winter Olympics, they are going to also put facilities for the hydrogen. So we really think there's a really good opportunity with this consensus to push this sector to be mature.
That's inspiring. And I also think that, I mean, you're clearly already thinking end to end. It's not just where you create the energy, but how you transport it and how you use it and goes into the grid. But I think most people are getting more sophisticated and understanding this is an end-to-end solution you need, not just fixing one part.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is really, really inspiring. Let's move on to something more tactical, which is on the investment side. You mentioned that you follow the rounds when it's a smaller check, but sometimes you lead. What drives you to lead versus follow? How do you think about that?
Actually, most of the time we do a small ticket investment, we follow, and we like to be a syndicate. The reasons behind that is we don't want to be really come in and be dominant, and we are not agile. That's where we are in, because we want the company to be innovative and agile, but we want to see what's happening. We want to see the optionality, the orientation, and we want to be there to discuss with our syndicate co-investors. So most of the time we are more prefer to be a small ticket minority, but in the board as an observer, so that we see what's happening. We can help and support when it's necessary and needed, but we don't overwhelm the team. So we think that's better. But when it's come to sometimes pretty strategic deals or in some certain geographic location, we can add in a lot of value. In that sense, we don't mind actually to lead as well. So that's an exception.
I really like this approach. It's really about adding value and not ownership percentage or control or anything like this. It's about, we just want to be part of a syndicate. We want to make sure probably the investors are joining. How do you build this syndicate? Are you helping building the syndicate for the startups?
Actually, we probably are we are just communicating with startups, and we kind of think this is good to have a syndicate with financial investors, probably corporate investors, strategic and different. We see a lot of value by people, different investors. They can bring different angles and different values. So we kind of communicate that with the startup. Now, I used to be in the M&A, and I used to be really naively thinking, I can do big M&A, so I can handle the small venture deal, but it's completely different. In the sense, in M&A, it's true you are dividing, or you are talking about arrangement about something already done, mature, and probably not going to change dramatically in the future. So that's why it's important to see who get what, where the boundary for the responsibility and liabilities. But I just realized if I just put it on my M&A hat and want to control everywhere, sometimes I can, because they are small companies. And actually it makes miss a point, because venture investment is really to come in, build something that doesn't exist yet. Or we see that it's coming, but we don't have this big thing yet. So it's really somewhere you really come in with this mentality, think, we're not talking about dividing the company. Actually, there are some brilliant ideas, some brilliant team, but we're talking about something in the middle and long term in the future. So that's where we see more about how do we see the future, how they can grow, and who can come on board to be very helpful, but not being very detrimental for the company.
I think that's one of the most important golden nugget today, which is if you come with a mindset of control, you're missing the point, because you're basically betting on the future. And if you start to control, you're actually anchored and filtered by your knowledge of today, not the bet on the future. My friend and coach, Paul Holland, always tell me, if you invest in a company because you think they will listen to you, don't do that. So it makes a lot of sense. Now, many corporate VCs struggle with going fast, and you're specialized in Asia, where things can go extremely fast. How have you designed your investment decisions and investment committee for direct investments? have you designed it so that you can be as responsive as the startups need you to be?
Such a great question. That's my biggest challenge in the beginning, because on one hand, I have my corporates with a very solid and prudent system, which has all the reason to be there the way they are. And then I go to China, and the startup presume that sometimes we can sign the term sheet after the first meeting. So there are some gap. In the beginning, we were a bit frustrated, but later on, I think, that's where we really need to put on our entrepreneur kind of startup mind, trying to find solutions, because the system within the group exists for a reason, and it's well-intentioned reason. So how can we communicate with the stakeholders within the group to demonstrate we can add value, and we are kind of specialist in what we do, and have some trust, and also to get some flexibility in what we do. That's a lot of things we need to do. That's kind of like some kind of sustainable thing for us to constantly communicating and educating the stakeholders, and showing and making them trust. And on the other hand, probably find ways, if need to be quick, probably we can use convertible loans or some other measures. If needed, the situation is needed. So we had some deals that we are managed to execute relatively quickly. But that's something constantly need working on.
Very nice. And do you have something that you did that you think really improved and that was not too hard to change?
In the group?
In the decision making, something you changed in the design so that you could go faster and maybe the audience would want to try.
Yeah, I think the thing is, that, for example, in the beginning, I come from M&A. I like to present a deal when it's really a beautiful deal, nice deal, attractive deal. I think it's so important just start once we have a sense this is a great team, this is a great solution. We started to chat to people. And no need to be perfect. It's really can be spontaneous. So here I have this opportunity. It's very interesting. They are doing this and that. Just put that on people's mind, so that when we come back, we just shaking people and asking them to break their own rules and giving us investment. That's not the right way to do as well. So it's really as early as possible, thinking who can be the sponsor, potential stakeholder, and people who can supporting this, and just chat with them, share a document with them so that they already know that it exists, they're curious. And then when the final decision comes, it's not a surprise, it can go quickly.
Very nice. I want to ask my final question on something much more inspiring beyond corporate venturing, which is all about the 2050 goal. What do you think corporate venturing should do? And what can we do to make sure that we achieve the 2050 goal and maybe even achieve it earlier than 2050?
I think it's extremely important to be curious and open-minded, because I think probably more than half of the solution doesn't exist yet. So we just need to constantly to be open to all the solutions there. It's a very complicated portfolio. It's not one solution. I think corporate can certainly play an important role, because those are the big systems and big kind of projects, and corporates can certainly adding value by using leverage their existing capacities, and sometimes to have a kind of different approach. For some cases, can be agile and quick, and to be really like what we're trying to test, go slightly beyond the border. Like, why not look at agriculture? It's also big CO2. Yeah. Anyway, I think it's also very, very important to be really down to earth, to really know the physics. Will that work? That's also important in doing the deals.
Xin, I think I will end on that, but I really like one thing, and I can't agree more with you, which is half of the solutions are not yet invented. And that's really what we should be looking at, is invest in these entrepreneurs that are developing the solutions that are not yet there, will get us to this goal. Xin, thank you for being so nice, open, and candid. This was really nice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicolas. It's a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.